Hi, welcome to another demonstration for the Unitrends System Administration course. In this how-to video tutorial, we're going to take a look at creating and managing SharePoint backup jobs. Once again here, it starts really in our lab, and I just want to first show you that, I'm running SharePoint here on this instance, on this virtual machine. Here's the remote desktop session to it. You can go in and you can look at the services of it. You can see that SharePoint is installed and running on here when you look at the SharePoint services, right? Once again, we've gone through the SharePoint module and we've looked at all the required components that have to be installed. Here's the SharePoint VSS Writer as well, right? We've got all that installed on here. Now, through the asset management, we've also installed the Unitrends agent menu. Remember, we've also installed the Unitrends agent in here. It's running, once again, as a service in here. You can see it running as BP Server D up here. This is our Unitrends agent that runs. It's listening on port 1743, and it's what allows us in our interface here. So if you log into your local source and you register that asset against a SharePoint object, right, a SharePoint application server, here, I'm just going to log in as me first. All right, and if you go over to your Configure tab and you look at your protected assets in here, right, you should see a SharePoint server. If you register that asset and it detects SQL and SharePoint on that server, then here's your SharePoint farm object. It's a different object than your SQL databases that are on the back end for SharePoint. All right, everything from the BDC service here up to the SharePoint config here, those are all SharePoint SQL objects that are actually backed up as part of this farm backup. All right, I don't need to run separate SQL backups to protect these databases. Right, those databases will always remain not protected in our dashboard, in our not protected count. We've talked about this in a couple of the other modules. Right, these SharePoint objects back here, they're always going to be false. We're never going to run backups against those in this case here. Right, remember, once again, if you have databases that are over 250 gigs, you may consider running SharePoint backups against those SharePoint type of databases back here. Once again, check that knowledge base, check back to the SharePoint module on SharePoint backups module on more detail. All right, but here's our basic farm down here. Right, we've got our simple farm right here. We're going to show you how to create a backup job for that simple SharePoint farm. And remember, for the SharePoint farm, the simple version, we don't have to assign any credentials to it. Depending on your type of installation, whether you're full farm or single server instance, if you're a single server instance, you don't have to assign any credentials. If you're a full farm, you may have to come in here and manage a credential at the SharePoint level and then make sure that we are assigned that same credential through the Satori interface here. All right, but that's how you do that, is under the Configure tab, you'll edit that asset and assign it a credential based on that asset type, right, depending on your SharePoint deployment. A couple of different ways to create SharePoint backup jobs. Easiest way to create any type of backup job is to go to the Jobs section here, go to Create a Job, and go to Backup. You're going to drop down and change your list to SharePoint types, SharePoint objects. You'll see a list in here. Break that list down to your instance. Highlight your SharePoint object. Depending on your deployment, you'll see different objects in there. And you'll create a schedule for each SharePoint object. Here, once again, we are running an agent-based SharePoint farm backup. And we are going to run a week full and daily differentials. You could say, instead of the word daily, you may use like 24-hour diffs. Right? You may also only run them on weekdays, so you may be a little bit more descriptive with your schedule name, your job name, so somebody coming in behind you once again can kind of tell what that job is going to be doing without having to go too far into it. Down here at the bottom, we are going to create a schedule for this job. We're not going to run it now. We are going to create a schedule. We are going to run fulls with differentials. Now, once again, before you start to create any type of schedule or any type of recurrence in here, you should have your schedule planning or your Excel sheet that you created. Once again, in this sheet down here, you can see my SharePoint farm here. I've went through my assets and I've identified their SLA, their cattle, pets, or people, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, right? Critical, core, dependent, whatever you call it. And I've assigned it to a schedule here, daily diffs. If you look at that schedule name here, I've broken out that schedule name. You can see down here that the SharePoint farm here it is, SharePoint database week full daily diffs. It's a weekly full at Fridays at 11 and differentials Monday through Thursday at 11. Right? A little bit of a different schedule in there we're going to create. So we're going to go ahead and set this for Fridays at 11. We're going to set this to our same Friday that we want this to recur. It's going to start tonight at 11 o'clock for me. I'm going to go ahead and set this to 11 p.m. That's my full. Once again, make sure this start date, you set it. If I were going to run this on Saturdays, I would make sure I set this to Saturday. Don't just leave this on today's date. Down here at the bottom, the recurrence, we're going to do every 24 hours, Monday through Thursday this time. We're also going to run these at 11 p.m. Right, so we don't need Friday because Friday is going to be our full. Monday through Thursday differential and a Friday full. That's our strategy. Once again, you have the options up here for choosing your storage. Physical appliances, you're only going to have the one big internal pool, right? The Recovery Series physical appliances. UB, our virtual appliances, you may have multiple storage devices you can point to, but it still, in most cases, is recommended to create one big internal storage pool and just leave this default. You can also turn on verification for SharePoint backups. It's inline verification. It may slow the backup down a little bit. But once again, through the VSS writer process, when we write SharePoint backups, we are doing some integrity checks back there for you. If you see errors or warnings in your backups, pay attention to those. They're very accurate. You do have issues if we report it to you. Once again, you got job results and job failures in here as well, too. Usually you're going to leave those checked to make sure you get any summary when the job runs and any direct failures if you have any issues with this job. All right, we'll go ahead and create this SharePoint farm job here now. So here you can see an error popped up. It says the schedule name must be 40 characters or less. All right, so if you look at this whole big long name out here, I can try to drop off the SharePoint. I know it's a farm, an agent farm backup, and maybe try to save that. And now that was just enough to go ahead and fit that in the schedule name here. The job name was just short enough now. So here you can see that agent farm week full, weekday 24-hour differential. And you can see that same thing here in the details. You can see that the schedule is never ran, and it's going to run tonight at 11 o'clock, which would get its first full. Even if this were a weekday, it would run its first full tonight. All right, we're going to go ahead and kick this schedule off. Go ahead and run it now. You can see the last ran, went and time-stamped it for now, and it still is going to run tonight at 11 o'clock, and it's going to run another full tonight at 11 o'clock because it is Friday. If it were a weekday, once again, it would run a differential tonight if you kick off a manual full now. If you go over to your active jobs in here, you can see this job running now against this farm. You can see this is not a very big farm for testing purposes. You can see the backup is already executing the SharePoint backup. If you look back at the SharePoint backup module and how this process works, it's now basically opened up a share and it's now copying the backup to the appliance. All right, that process is actually happening. If you go to your appliance during a backup process, you can actually see a folder out here that's created for the SharePoint backup process during this backup process. When it's done, it will remove this folder. That folder will go away when this backup process is completed. We'll go ahead and let this job run. When it's completed, we'll come back and show you how to verify SharePoint Farm backups and what the catalogs and the dashboard updates look like after these backups are completed. All right, so there we can see the SharePoint backup is dropped off the list. So once again, over here under the Recent Jobs tab, we can now see that new SharePoint Farm right here at the top of the list because we're sorted on, once again, started by default. So it's kind of the newest jobs at the top. Starting over here on the dashboard, right? And I'm sorry, by the way, you can view the details of each of these jobs once again. If you need to get any log references, you can see the details. If you have warnings or failures, you may have, I have some failures down here. You may see the errors and failures in here, and you may need to go in and see why those are failing and warning. And this is usually the first place you go to start to look for that detail when you have those issues. Okay, the job will finish. You'll come over here and see what the status was and see if you need to troubleshoot or do anything with it, right? Now, starting over here with the dashboard, you'll notice now that your protected asset count, it didn't change yet. Once again, this only refreshes like once an hour. So if you just ran a manual backup, it finished up, you come back here, you look at your dashboard, you're like, well, how come it's not updating? Well, it only updates every hour. Now, you can click this up here, and it will refresh, but you don't see it until you kind of, run a report and then maybe go back to the dashboard, and now you'll see that these numbers have changed now because now you have one more protected asset. If you filter on true over here, you now will see your SharePoint Farm in here, and you can see it by either typing maybe the instance name, the client name, right? Here's your farm down here. Or it is just called farm in our case here, so you could just filter on the instance name of farm. Or you can also do that down here. Maybe you want to look once again at all your SQL assets across that same server, or maybe once again you just want to look at your farm. There's a list of the protection details for the SharePoint Farm. You can see it's a part of the schedule. You can see it's got one successful full so far. It has not ran any differentials. If you ran a differential, you would see the differential backup type in there of full and differential. Those are the types that it would be running. You also have details here of successes and warnings and failures. We only have one backup here as well, but you can start to see those details in here in a nice little summary. Right, this is more like your protection policy. Is the asset protected? Yes, and how is it protected? And what's a little summary? All right, you can also run over here. Once again, that report is the protection summary report, but you're getting to it through the dashboard here. Either of these two links take you to that same report. Now, you'll also see this new SharePoint Farm show up at the appliance level under the reports, under the capacity report. Right? If you have a large SharePoint environment, you'll see an increase under this SharePoint client. I don't have a large database. I'm not seeing a huge influx of data when I run a SharePoint Farm against this client. You don't see the farm in here as the asset, but if it's large enough, it will calculate, and you'll see a difference here at the asset level. Once again, this looks at all of your newest fulls for all of your assets, calculates them at the asset level, and gives you that total space used across all those assets. This is kind of your recovery time objective report that lets you know what you can put back and how big it is. How long is it going to take? If you go to the Recovery tab, you can see your backup catalog, and you can filter, once again, on the asset name. Here's my farm, here's my catalog, and I have my recovery options up here at the top. You can mount and recover the entire farm. Once again, check the SharePoint Recovery module and demonstration for more details on how to recover SharePoint. Once again, that's a pretty good overview for you for managing SharePoint backups.